Mr. Billy Funderburg, whose tireless efforts really brought a lot of people together. I think we should as most of you have come to find out, I am not an event planner. Thank you. Laugh all you want. Get it out of your system, or carry it with you throughout the whole event.
We love you.
Thank you. Thank you. But likewise, 20 years ago, I wasn't a custom car builder. But I took it upon myself to kind of challenge General Motors and some of the OEMs to do something different with their vehicles. And I met with GM at an event, and they said that they would sponsor a TV show I worked on if I customized cars for them, and if I took those cars to the SEMA show. Everyone knows about SEMA, right? I never heard of it. Everyone knows how to customize cars. I didn't know how to match a tire to a wheel. Yet I took the challenge. But I told GM, if I do this, I want to be able to build these vehicles with some type of eco-messaging. And so one of the first vehicles I did was a Hummer. I wanted to attack Hummer in particular. And so what we did with this vehicle is we put new wheels and tires on it, all made from recycled parts. All of the custom work that was done on this vehicle was done with recycled and recyclable parts. But the best part about it was I worked with this university, Scripps Institution of Oceanography, to find algae-based biodiesel. And so I had worked prior to this on with ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, biodiesel. None of them really fit the bill for where I wanted to go. Algae-based biofuels did. And so I built this vehicle with some friends. The fuels that we used were later used by, I'll back it up a little bit, by the Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mavis. He wanted to do the Great Green Fleet, which was to operate an entire aircraft carrier battalion on renewable fuels. And the fuel that they chose was algae-based biofuels. And so that's how I got to work with the Department of Defense, the Obama administration, and so on, was promoting that biofuel. Again, I wasn't a car builder, but I saw a niche that had to be filled, and I wanted to do it, so I did. I was also, 10 years ago, I was also not a marine archaeologist, but I read the book Island of the Blue Dolphins. Does anyone know that book? Yes, it's a great book. Read that book with my daughter, and she asked me, Dad, is this a true story? And the story is about a young indigenous woman that's left alone on an island for 18 years. Comes to find out it is a true story. My father worked on that island, and so we set out to try to find more about that true story, put the story together, and wrote a book about it. But as a result of me not being a marine archaeologist, but being drawn into a subject that I felt needed to be addressed, I was seeing a lot of abuse in the archaeological regime, is what I call it. There were a lot of non-indigenous people working in the field that were storing human remains, that were digging up human remains illegally. And so through the work that I did, we were able to identify 15,000 human remains, full skeletons. And through the work I did here at Scripps, we're able to actually find the most likely descendants of most of those human remains in order to get them reburied. Now, what Stan didn't tell you earlier was oftentimes in the indigenous communities, if you take human remains out of the ground, you've broken the blessing, and then the soul attached to those human remains are forced to walk the earth in purgatory. And so only by putting them back into the earth can they be resent to join their families again in heaven. So all the accomplishments I've done, I would say that is really among my favorites, that we're able to actually put the human remains back. So being that I'm not an event planner, I saw that there was a need that had to be filled in our space. I went to a few different expos, and I saw a bunch of people that really didn't represent a full cross-section of what I felt was our community. I didn't see any indigenous people there. I didn't see people from other communities that I felt should be there. And so I was working with the Kumeyaay at the time, and I thought we need to get the Navy together with the Kumeyaay. We need to get guys that can build microgrids together with tribal communities that need energy autonomy, energy sovereignty. We need those same guys doing microgrids to be able to get with the military, so we have even more military security. So that's what this summit is all about, and that's why I brought you all together. I'm not a meeting planner, but look at this room. Look at the people that are here. You guys are amazing. Cross-section of our community. Thank you. And just Tom Soto pointed this out to me. He said, Tom, you have got to have the CE Summit at this time. They just passed the Inflation Reduction Act. There's all this money being brought into our community. We have no excuses, except not working together. And so we've got the money, we've got the opportunity. I can't wait to hear your presentation so I can see how you solve all these problems. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Ara and let her take the mic and take it from there. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, good morning. How's everybody doing? Good morning. Excellent.
Morning.
For those of you that have to wake up extra early today, drive down, fly down, we want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. This is probably the first time we are together post-pandemic. So it's pretty exciting to see people and be here and not be in incognito mode with the mask, but actually being able to have these conversations and be together in community and speak about something so important today, like is our current climate crisis and the response to the climate crisis to the federal level and to the local level. So I couldn't be more excited to introduce a friend, someone that I take close note to, someone that the first time I met at a corner restaurant. We had a very interesting conversation about Los Angeles politics, being in the Latinx community, being part of this community, and also being part of setting a trend on renewable energy and also on climate change policy. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Tom Soto. So he is a long-time investor in the impact sector. He was born and raised in East LA County and in Pomona in California. And that is so dear to my heart because there's only so many of us out there doing this work. He comes from a family of leaders, and two of the same most well-respected Latino civil rights leaders are, part of his family. His father was an assembly member and the first Latino elected to the state legislature in 1962. So he has big shoes, big legacy before him. Tom's mother was Nell Soto, and she was Phil's campaign manager and the mother of their 6 children and longtime advocate in supporting farm workers' rights. So I love this bio because it has so much intersectionality on what we know today to be important to us, especially as it relates to reducing carbon and zero emissions. Tom has owned and managed 4 PE farms. He went for the money, and we're very grateful for that. And he managed his family's investments office, Latiner Partners LLC. He's also a long time pioneer voice in the diversity in fund management and technology movement. He has stood at the dovetail of energy tech, cloud-based, and LOT platforms, renewables, and to over many for industries, industrial revolution-driven platforms where technology contributes to improving the human condition of all. So, Tom, we're so excited to have you here. Please join us here at the podium, and thank you so much for your wisdom and your willingness.
Well, good, Autumn. There you are. Thanks for that very, very kind introduction. We've known each other a long time. It's the only thing I can say. It's a shame that you're still not at DWP providing leadership there and helping us to, green the shit out of that agency. So thanks for the warm introduction. Thanks for your leadership, and as always, it's great to have you in our lives and provide that leadership. Tom, thanks for inviting me and asking me to join you and address this group. And of course, Billy, who, I don't know how long we've known each other, Billy? 40? Yeah, I mean, a long, long time. I think it was the Mondale campaign. And then everybody else who helped us set this up. I have to thank Farley, my boy over there, who's my associate at Latimer, and Philip, who also helped design this presentation, who's in his last 20 minutes at Cornell University back east, who I wish could be here, but he's unable to join us. So, here we are. I called this, Tom asked, he said, I want an overview. What do you think is going to happen with, the first call was like, oh, we're not going to do this conference, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, I mean, don't tell me that now. You just sign this fucking thing. It took us 40 years to get here, and you're not going to do it. Even if it's 3 people, the Lord is in our midst, right? And we have to just do this. I mean, we have folks filming this, so, it is an august group of people, may not be the biggest group, but it's going to get viral. I mean, I put a post 2 weeks ago, Farley, on the ban on 2035 of internal combustion engines. And, I think about 280,000 views later, a lot of it venomous, right? But it's kind of like the battle we have to engage in order to get a higher moral ground. So Tom agreed, okay, we'll do it. And he said, can you still speak? So, of course. So, he asked me to do the keynote, and I was telling him this morning, I don't know how much of a note it is because it's rather robust, or how key it is, but really counts. But I thought I would talk about climate change 3.0, or clean tech 3.0. We've already gone through 2 generations of clean technology investment. The first one was really, really great because it broke out a huge amount of technology, and then the recession hit, and it all went off a cliff with everything else. Due to the leadership of, quite frankly, the Bush administration for having embraced the Obama administration that was coming in. If you remember, TARP 1 was supported by a Republican Congress and a Republican president, but was designed by a Democratic president and Democratic Congress coming in. And that helped to put steroids on our recovery. And because of the advent of cloud technology, all the IP, a lot of us remember the blockbuster Tower Records, Barnes and Noble moment. They all got materialized in the 4th Industrial Revolution, and that accelerated Clean Tech 2.0. And that's where we have been. And now we're entering the next generation, which I call climate tech, because clean tech apparently is now a 4-letter word with all the investors. Climate tech 2.0, 3rd generation addressing climate change. Whoops. Working with the private sector, government, and communities we serve, responding to climate change, the economy, and the quality of life. That's how I define my life. That's how we move forward. We're not looking for 10%, we're looking for 10 times. So the mindset has to be imperative. So why do we have this picture? And I want you to look at this because there's a common denominator that I'm going to point out as we go through these photos. But this is Wally Moon, who was a Dodger, came from Brooklyn. 1957, the MLB approved the franchise to move from the O'Malley family from Brooklyn to LA. We didn't have a stadium then, so what did we do? the Dodgers used the Coliseum. Wally Moon was a left-handed hitter and was able to hit a high fastball. He learned by adjusting his right foot. And where did that fastball go? Right off the tip of his bat over the walls of the Coliseum. There was a young broadcaster who came from Brooklyn with the Dodgers, Vince Scully, and he would call that a moonshot. So 1958, 59, 60, 61, we would get these moonshots. And what else was happening at that time? A young gentleman named John Kennedy was coming into office and was inheriting this new agency called NASA. And he wanted to go ahead and put forward something that was visionary and in response to communism and response to Sputnik, which we lost, Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, which we lost. And in 1962, he was asked to give an address at Rice University. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. That's the most important statement in this. Other things. Not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is the one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. But again, this statement entirely really speaks to the moonshot, which he never really said, but others around him did, and they chose that term to move forward. But it's the other things. And what were those other things? This is September 12, 1962. Jules, you and I remember this, and others in the room, but this is when James Meredith was fighting to get into the University of Alabama at Oxford. Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education, boom, boom, boom. Bobby Kennedy was having phone calls with Governor Roy Barnett, and it was he and his brother who decided, you know what, fuck this. Let's go down to the South, let's give an address about the future, and let's talk about those other things. He wasn't talking about just space. He was talking about lifting the quality of life and civil rights for every American in the country. And it was this initiative that gave to us about a $300 billion effort that was 5% of the gross national product of the country at the time. But this was a moonshot. That was 1962, and we achieved the goal of getting a man on the moon and coming back. But it was also an indication of the need for addressing civil rights. And where did NASA get placed? Johnson Space Center in Houston, the McCott Assembly Facility in New Orleans, the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi, the Marshall Space Center, Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, Kennedy Space Center in Florida. That was law-rolling, that was leverage. You help me with this, we'll deliver for you there. And it was a success, but it involved the entire American community to move forward. So what's the moonshot for 2022? You know, you have moral moonshots, you have civic and legislative moonshots, and these are two of them. I have this picture of me and my family, modestly. But I mean, when you think about it, I mean, that couldn't happen 30 years ago. Two gay guys and a 13-year-old kid with the President of the United States, a 79-year-old man who represents everything in my life that was good in the past, having the courage to take us into the future. That's a 79-year-old guy. Yeah. You know, I took my kid to go see the Rolling Stones and Paul McCartney. I mean, I'm completely dispelled the myth that 80 years old is too old. You see that? And then the legislative moonshot. And what is the difference here? There's Nancy and her colleagues celebrating the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. There's John Kennedy. There's Barack Obama. Civil rights. We didn't have that level of diversity personally or legislatively. That itself was a moonshot. What's a moonshot? Placing purpose at the core of corporate governance and considering the needs of all stakeholders, including workers, community institutions, as opposed to solely shareholders. In this context, we're setting targets that are ambitious, but also inspirational, aspirational, able to catalyze innovation across multiple sectors and actors in the economy. It's about imagining a better future, organizing public and private investments to achieve that future. That's what the economist Mariana Mazzucato, who writes Moonshot Economics, a great book. She's a great author in this area and counsel to the people of the city of London and other cities. as an investor, I kind of like to adopt this ethic. I have my own definition, but this one articulates it pretty well. For, Jana, someone like you who's a trustee in a large pension fund for the city, this might be a standard to look at and say, okay, how do we do this, Rod? How are we going to invest in pension dollars consistent with this type of fiduciary ethic? But moonshots are nothing new. We've seen them. I'm sure thousands of years ago, a bunch of people were sitting around a cave saying, how do we move so faster? Let's invent the wheel. Right? Well, in 1844, one good moonshot was the invention of the telegraph, right? Baltimore to Washington. Imagine, you didn't have to wait 3 weeks for a letter. It happened instantaneously. 1863, legislative moonshot. This guy had the guts to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. Can you imagine doing that at that point in time when your country is so divided that this is going to add fuel to that fire? But he did it. In an era where it's depleting resources, everything is going to the South to make sure our union stands for itself. He also gets Congress to agree to vote to support the first transcontinental railroad. And by the way, where does it go? It's in Omaha. You know why it was headworks in Omaha? We all remember from the 4th grade the Missouri Compromise, and then the Maine Nebraska settlement. It's because Missouri voted under sovereignty, states' rights. They wanted to be a slave state. St. Louis was the archway to the West, according to Lewis and Clark. They set it up in a free state because Nebraska voted it to be a free state. And that's where the headworks of Transcon went. But that was, again, a blend of civil rights and progress moving forward in a collective moonshot. 1882, first electrical grid. 1939, Albert Einstein writes Franklin Roosevelt and saying, hey, the Nazis have split the atom. He takes that letter from Albert Einstein and 3 or 4 other scientists, puts in the margins, allocated $5 million. He sent it to the Corps of Engineers in Manhattan, and that became the Manhattan Project. That was a moonshot, like the ultimate moonshot, up until later on in 1962 when the moonshot speech was given. But between those 2 points, you had the signing of the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. This was John Kennedy's baby. He wasn't there to put it through or get it through Congress. So as a result, he wanted to have it, but he was not there. He was assassinated like Abraham Lincoln was for standing for what he believed in. And ultimately, Lyndon Johnson, the father of great society, got it through. And in 1969, we finally had our first man set on his foot on the moon. That is the ultimate moonshot up until now. And then we have, going on to 2015, the beginning of the 4th Industrial Revolution, dematerialization of everything. Everyone has it in their hands. It's called an iPhone, a smartphone, whatever it is. It probably has about a third of the power that it took to get a man on the moon, maybe more. And then in 2020, all the response that we had to COVID, to BLM, to ESG and DEI becoming standards for governance. This is the first time in my life where people in corporate boardrooms and in pensions and so forth are talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental, social government standards as a result of a horrible incident in the murdering of George Floyd that set the country on fire in the midst of the Trump era, the COVID era, and so forth. That was a crazy, unreal, unpredictable, we could have written it, response. And that led to where we are now, which is, of course, the Biden administration and having the courage and the legislative capacity to actually get to where we're at now. A Zero Emission Summit celebrating the introduction of the Inflation Reduction Act and moving our country forward in an era of climate change and using a combined effort of capital resources, government and private resources, emotional, religious resources to get to a net zero economy. So this is our agenda, my agenda, introduction to the IRA and net zero, policy and industry approaches, and then what's threatening that? Who is out there that is doesn't want to see, mostly incumbents, don't want to see this type of change. And then how do we move forward? IRA highlights, put puts us back on track. Design to reduce carbon emissions by 40%, emissions by 50% in 2030. That's pretty bold. Many of us were involved in the Build Back Better America, and part of that package had $500 billion up to for climate change until Mr. Manchin said, no, I'm not going to do this. And then 3 weeks later, he breathed life back into the climate change portion of that bill, and that's what the IRA, I don't know how they call it, but that's what he wanted it. Let's give it to him because it got us through. It includes investment and tax credits, 370 billion in investments and tax credits that will spur clean energy sector growth. That will boost the velocity of the sector by 160%. It does make clean energy priorities, 27 billion for accelerator programs, and that's going to be put out now. In the next 10 months, it's going to be gone. So if you're part of an accelerator, an incubator, a nonprofit, anyone that is helping to design technologies and IP that's going to get to market and help reduce carbon, you're in the money at this point. 28 billion to build new EV facilities. God, we know that. I drove my husband's Range Rover here because my EV, I'm not going to be here long enough to recharge. And by the way, I would say 60% of the charging stations that I go don't work, right? They're not Wi-Fi. They've been vandalized. Some valet has parked their cars there. So I can't trust driving this far still. Not because my car can't make it. It's because the EV infrastructure is failing the model. And 10 billion investment tax credits. That's really important for people like me who invest in this space. It's not about the multiple on, say, a PPA with PG&E or Edison. It's about me being able to get to market the carbon, right? Or access to production tax credit or the 45Q IRS tax credit. That's my multiple. That gets me the money. And then closer to net zero brings us one step closer to achieving net zero and improving quality of life in underserved communities. What's that mean? Well, this president, because we have friends that look like people in this room in the Oval Office, counseling him, like Julie Rodriguez, whose senior job is his granddaughter, come up with this, Justice 40, accountability fundamentals. This is essentially, I'm going to read the whole thing, but what it says is 40% of all regulation, legislation, government resources, subsidies, tax credits have to be committed to the underserved communities, part of the environmental justice communities that we've all been serving for years and years and years. I mean, I hear clap from Laura because, it's about time. And, when I was a kid, we called it environmental racism, right? Remember that? And then it was people of color in the environment. And then finally in the 90s, with the Clinton administration, well, let's just settle for environmental justice. It's been that ever since, and now it's institutionalized in the form of policy and a standard that ensures that we're able to have access to that capital for underserved, likely low-income and diverse communities. Yay! Climate change and BIPOC. I know everybody says BIPOC. I feel left out, so I say BIPOC. Black, Latino, Indigenous people of color. And, we all know that the historical pattern of urban planning has put us on the margins or in the middle of a lot of the polluting sources within the communities that we were born and raised in. I was born and raised in East LA and San Diego, so we were right in the middle of stage 1, 2, 3 smogglers. Every day we play football and I play in the gym with air conditioning on. That's no longer true these days because of the leadership of people in this room and other activist-minded folks who said, no, we're not going to accept this. But even still, we only 1 or 2 Latinos live in counties that frequently violate standards for ground level ozone carcinogen. That's really, really bad. I mean, mostly diesel, right? You gotta get rid of diesel. American Indians, Alaska Natives are 48% more likely to live in areas that will be inundated by flooding from sea level. I mean, that's huge. And African Americans are 30% more likely to live in areas where childhood asthma is diagnosed and likely to be exacerbated, more so as a result of climate change. So what's IRA's plan for quality of life? I mean, you can see that there's, more than de minimis amounts committed to legacy pollution, affordable, accessible, clean energy, disadvantaged communities, but also providing economic support in terms of green jobs and what we could do to move our country forward on a more equitable basis so that as that capital comes in, who's going to be building, you know, Vince and your electric truck, you know, or who's going to be manufacturing those windmills, the turbines, the photovoltaics. You know, I'm in the process of aggregating, you know, biomass plants around the country because I'm very interested not in net zero, but in net carbon negative, right? Because that's a term that you're going to hear in about 6 months. It's like, oh, net zero doesn't work. We need carbon negative. And so we're going to have to emphasize that. But the people who are going to get those jobs, at least with the power plants we're looking at, are going to be in the Central Valley. You know, and you know, they're not going to be in Bel Air. So, and then the rural communities. You know, we still have a great agricultural economic sector, and this is addressing that specifically. My friend Oscar Gonzalez is now the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, so he's responsible for implementing a lot of this program. And a lot of it has to do with energy programs, electric cooperatives, and direct investments to enhance resilience, which is the impacts as a result of climate change, things like on soil and stuff. So, as a result, we're going to be addressing that with rural development. Tom Vilsack is in charge of that agency. He's been a great administrator at USDA before. He will be again. And then access to capital. A lot of people don't think about banking and stuff like that when you're talking about climate change. But you know, if you're at poverty level, you know, you don't really give a shit about climate change and greenhouse gases if you can't pay your kids' tuition or you can't pay your health care. So here's a way to help folks access capital low-income communities. So as a multiplier, we're going to see huge amounts of investments or commitments being given to the SBA, the comptroller of the currency who runs the community development financial institutions. These are important. I've been a fintech guy. One day I woke up, I had like aspiration categories, like 5 fintech companies. And I saw that I had a pattern of investing in these platforms that were dedicated to increasing access to the Latino and Black communities and disrupting payday out of our neighborhoods because that's just scavenging the economics of our families. But this is going to be key to helping to improve the quality of life and make sure that it keeps pace with the level of response that we have with climate change. You know, they increase access to capital. It allows and encourages increased community investment, and it allows and encourages job growth and quality of life. So where does this money come from? Many of us know about CRA, Community Reinvestment Act dollars that retail banks must have. So as a percentage of their deposits have to be dedicated to small business, low income, diverse community benefits. And that's going to be boosted as a result of IRA, which is a great thing because we're now thinking about climate change, not on a linear basis, but on a very multi-parallel basis, knowing that economics is key. You got to get buy-in. Green banks, again, here's another example, $27 billion to greenhouse gas reduction funds. That's huge. And look what it does to Jigar Shah's DOE loan program. This is the loan program that everybody likes to think about Solyndra. We remember that failed experiment, but that was just one of hundreds of loans that were made. The most noteworthy and successful one was Tesla, right? They got a 5 times on their money. That was worth it. And here, right now, you have $60 billion, and it's going to increase for the overall guarantee authority, the finance clean energy process, which would de-risk capital that people like me put in. It's like, boy, I'm going to put money in that because they got $80 million of debt, low interest from the people of our country. That's $250 billion. That's going to put, you know, accelerators on this whole thing. So how do we do that? Well, it has to be fast. You know, we don't have a lot of time. So we need to establish 100% renewable power energy grid. That's going to be the highest priority because it's time sensitive. It has to address quality of life. And that means education, it means access to capital, it means jobs, it means the ability to meet the economic needs of the communities we're all serving. And it has to be technology agnostic. It doesn't matter how we get to net zero, it just means we get it. Meeting peak and base load energy demand will require a combination implementation of solutions. And the other thing, sad to say, is we got to talk about water. I mean, that's on everyone's mind. I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night, it's like, oh my God, this turned deadpool, right? Getting to net zero has to be technology agnostic. Again, what are the technologies that get us there that haven't been addressed as strongly as, say, solar and wind? And there's a lot of alternatives, and we have to have those options in order to provide 24-hour dispatchable power throughout the grid. We saw yesterday that Gavin had to turn on peaker plants that are using fossil fuels to meet the energy demand, which is adding to the problem. But if we took, for example, some of the 500 million bark beetle dead trees from climate change and harvested them and fed them into regional and micro grid biomass energy, we would be able to avoid two things: blackouts and wildfires that are started because transmission lines have fallen on these trees and they're standing fuel. And so I'm a strong believer in biomass, plus that takes you net carbon negative, not just net zero. Hydrogen, again, the biggest thing that we have going on in communities of color and low-income communities is ozone, particulate matter. So that's diesel. But movement of trading goods is very important in the state of California. 46% of our GDP goes through the ports of Long Beach and LA. And all of that is basically diesel related. But if we had hydrogen heavy duty programs, I think we could see the possibility of capturing most of those economics while improving the air quality, like on the 710 corridor. Storage. We need to improve the reliability of storage, cut cost resilience, integrate renewable sources, and that's connected to lithium, which is a high energy density, low maintenance, increased longevity. And I don't know, about 60 miles that way is the Imperial Valley. That's the fourth largest reserve of lithium underneath it. They have geothermal plants that actually are mining lithium brine and under an exemption, re-injected into the earth in order to keep their operations going. We should be mining that and building out a supply chain, creating jobs in the Imperial Valley. Again, you can't talk zero without talking about water. I'm not going to go through the details on this, but you get the picture. It takes a lot of energy to move, store, clean, reuse water. Ooh, Lake Margaret. Those are the good old days. Here's today. 26% of capacity. You know, and it's not just about water, it's about delivering electricity too. If we go into Deadpool scenario, you can't even draw down water, you can't even draw down electrons. This is Lake Powell. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. One picture is like when it was being filled. That's the top one. The picture here is now. Look at Lake Mead. I mean, it just goes to this little puddle way down there in the corner. That's 2000, 2021, 2020. So in conclusion, with this, you know, we have to talk about conservation of water, efficiency, groundwater basin reclamation, desalinization, recycling, reuse. I didn't add agriculture in here because I didn't know who was in the room in my place. But I mean, if it takes 5 gallons to produce 1 home, you know, probably not the place to be growing homes. So the other thing is hydrogen. You know, huge amounts of capacity with hydrogen. And I know people don't like natural gas because it's a fossil fuel, but that's the single largest source of hydrogen. And if we don't monetize natural gas, then the owners of natural gas are not required to capture it, use it, and it gets released. So we might win the battle of electric vehicle population because we don't like natural gas. But if the gas company is gathering and monetizing natural gas, they're not required to not flame it. So it gets released. So you're going to lose the battle or lose the war on greenhouse gas emissions. Plus, there's a huge amount of tax credits and other multiples that you could get with the building of a hydrogen highway. This is going to be the key to the movement of trading goods to keep us competitive on the Pacific Rim and getting goods in and out of our country. So what are the threats? You know, we have this whole, woke capitalism that is grown into entire proposals. Here are some of the headlines. Be that from Swami, who wrote the book, is, been a very, very strong, effective critic of ESG investing, divested from fossil fuels. And now he has a whole conservative rank and file behind him that are funding him. In fact, he has now stopped writing. And what does he do? He gets all these resolutions around the country from governors and legislators to block their pensions from investing in ESG funds or funds that say they're going to remove fossil fuels from their portfolio. So those funds and portfolios are gone. So he starts his own fund, and he's already raised $500 million, with the great Addis of the world. So just 2 weeks ago, West Virginia kicked Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, and BlackRock out of their portfolio entirely. And last week, the head of the director of ESG for the Texas Pension Fund left her post. She resigned because there's nothing for her to do. This is going on in Arizona, did it yesterday. Texas, Ron DeSantis in Florida, their CIO left under protest. So we're going to see more of this as it occurs. But I'm famous for using this term. I don't want to be part of that old future. I want to be part of the new future. What's the old future? Well, preservation of the incoming technology. They're at risk. They're anti-ESG performance. They want to protect the status quo defined by fossil fuel economics, which are unreliable, ineffective in terms of delivery. See, that's their delivery. Lower quality of life, lack of diversity, doesn't even have anything to do with inclusion. And climate change is on back burner policy priorities. And the state of anti-ESG, you've got Peter Thiel funding it, you have Governor Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott promoting it, getting legislation in place to make it illegal to invest, claiming that it's an economic risk if you're investing in ESG. But the performance doesn't say that. ESG is a returns-based strategy. When you run public equity portfolios and you have an Apple or Nike or Starbucks who are running very clean, reducing their carbon, that means they're efficient. And having set up an ESG strategy for the Russell 1000 when I was managing director over at TCW, ESG wasn't about investing in solar, wind, or Tesla. It was about finding these companies that are very efficient in terms of their carbon, because if they're reducing less carbon, they're using less energy, and their supply chain is more efficient. Guess what else? If their board and their C-suite have they perform better, and they have higher cash flow. So their EBITDA, which is the basis for things that is improved as a result of the diverse thinking that's in the boardroom and implementation of that strategy at the executive level. Over the last 5 years, you can see that performance. I won't go through all of them, but obviously it's a good place to be as opposed to the alternative, which is continuing to invest in fossil fuels, blah, 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 and it's insane. Look at it. All these guys. I remember, Tom, you were talking about GM. I was working for Denny Manano way back when he had the GM impact eventually. Within 10 minutes of George Bush and the coup d'etat that occurred coming into office, that thing was killed. And within a year, my RAV4 electric vehicle was taken away. And the good news is it was the big three OEMs that invested heavily in that technology, and they doomed it to failure, which inspired the need for innovation, which along came Coda and Fisker and Tesla, and they brought life back into it, but it couldn't have happened without the direct support of the Obama-Biden administration. And I was head of that transition for the environment and energy. I was team lead for executive office of the president's transition team for White House. So in conclusion, what's the action items? Put IRA to work. We have to be technology agnostic when it comes to net zero. It's not how we get there, it's just how we get there. And then we have to prioritize our communities, our future, our kids. Low income, rural, Anglo, brown, white, yellow, purple. We all have to be there behind this because it is a moonshot. It is a collective effort to improve the quality of life by increasing access to access to capital, environmental conditions, and quite frankly, a better planet for our kids. So humanity may not survive climate change, the Earth will, but we may not be here to enjoy it. All of that said, that's my overview. That's how I'm thinking. This is not just about putting money out to the community to respond to climate change. This is a civil rights issue. This is access to capital. This is our ability to convert climate change into something that's much bigger, climate justice, and allowing everyone in the tent to benefit and be part of the solution. So all of that said, thanks for having me, Tom. I really appreciate it. Maybe if you want time for questions or anything like that, or you want to go straight into this panel, however you want to do it.
Let's go to the panel.
Okay.
Um,
I know, I'm a little long.
So I like the optimism, and I like what you're bringing to all of this. We've got some other people I'd like to bring up to the stage. Luke Sinkhania is a partner at Gridscape Solutions. He and I met when we were talking about doing some microgrids with some of the indigenous communities locally. Mark Foster, is Mark here? Oh, I think maybe he's coming in tomorrow. Matt, that's right. Come up. Matt is working. This will be interesting. Tom Soto is, Matt is with Harvard Trucking Association, and he brought some really interesting perspectives when we were talking on the phone the other day. So I thought it might be an interesting panel to put together, and what the IRA means in terms is for perspective and plans within the industry. Tom, you're a moderator. Are you ready to jump in?
Sure.
I'll let you take it.
So who is not here? Mark?
Mark.
Well, first, maybe each of you can just describe, you're a partner advisor at Gridscape, your company, and what do you anticipate it going through over the course of, to me, I like to define this IRA as once in a generation opportunity. And we all know it puts wins in our sails. But how does that convert to your operation and where you see your company set ahead?
Thanks for the question. Just briefly, I'll tell you about Gridscape because I'll set the stage for it. So Gridscape is primarily a technology and product developer for microgrids. To make it a little bit simpler, we are in the business of providing local sustainable power plants for sites that make you independent of utilities. So if you think about what happened yesterday, I was in San Jose, I've been in San Jose, it was 110 degrees and I lost power for 8 hours on Tuesday. Now, that is just where things are going. So that means the grid is becoming unstable over time because of the EV coming in, climate action, there are so many other things going on. One way to solve that problem is imagine if everybody had a local power, or 80% of the people had. We won't have this problem. Everybody will run, it won't be a problem. We'll be able to give the power back to the grid, and we won't have governors calling and saying, please conserve. Or if you have Navy, don't charge between 4 and 8 p.m. Just stupid. So the point I'm making is that to make the grid stable, you need what we call microgrids or distributed energy technologies. IRC, what it does is it reduces the cost of deploying these microgrids by providing additional incentives. We used to have in California about 26% IPC and a little bit of what we call SCHIP. So roughly the incentives were about 40%. Now that the incentives can go as much as 80%. What does that do? It reduces the cost for deploying microgrids around California. And we hope that that will increase the number of microgrids and that will help with the transition. So that's the benefit for us.
And as we move forward, there's the whole question, some of IRA addresses this on infrastructure, which is largely visioned without any view your microgrid capacity as being consistent with that misalignment, correcting it?
Well, I mean, if I understand your question, I mean, if I rephrase it, the misalignment is where the electricity demand is going to happen and what the grid is capable of doing. That's the misalignment that you're talking about. And microgrids help alleviate that because microgrids are essentially a power plant that works both ways. Power plants usually work unidirectionally. You have a second power plant, be a power one way. Microgrids work both ways. You can take power and you can give power back. So if you imagine a whole bunch of these power plants everywhere, they're going back and forth. That will stabilize the grid. So if that's what you mean by misalignment, that's where microgrid technology or any distributed energy resources. At the end of the day, anything that allows you to have power coming in and going out.
Right. And then, Matt, the CEO of the Trucking Association, maybe just share with us a little bit about the association, your membership, and, they're basically, at in the throes of, this era, where there's huge amount of economics associated with trucking in California. It is a labor state, so there's a lot of union and labor passion about this. And we appreciate all the economics that we get out of trucking and moving and trading goods. Where do you see yourself and your association helping to move the ball forward in this respect?
Well, thank you, Tom, and for having the opportunity here today. This is always a unique situation for our industry because trucks are looked at for the woes of the economic, environmental world. Right? They're close to communities. They're, the diesel fuel that you talked about is the lifeblood of this industry. It's extremely efficient. You have motors that will last up to 1 million miles before they even need a rebuild. So where we find ourselves in this ever-evolving, discussion here in California especially is that we are on the bleeding edge, whether we like it or not. And, when we talk about the environmental impacts, we talk about the health impacts, all of my members are all in the same communities that all of these folks who are disproportionately impacted by probably really bad land use decisions that go back decades. And, the amount of goods that are coming through, as you mentioned, LA Long Beach, major economic engine. When we think about where we're moving in the future, we always have this one eye on, what's next. And it's, in our industry, if it saves us money, we're going to be doing it. It's just we have to be extremely efficient because our profit margins are razor thin. Our association represents the largest motor carriers in the country. You can think of them as you drive down the highway all the way down to a single truck, owner, operator, independent entrepreneur, business person. And all of them have the same goal at the end of the day, is to move goods, to basically feed and clothe and medicate the entire nation. We are the lifeblood of the economy. And as I said, as diesel is our lifeblood, we are in this strange situation now where we've seen tremendous advances in diesel engine technology, where they've gone from, NOx emissions, which is a precursor to ozone. Right? I don't have to tell you guys the chemistry behind it. We went from 10 grams per brake horsepower hour back in the 90s to now down to 0.02 grams of brake horsepower hour when you start looking at renewable natural gas, especially natural gas fuels. For the diesel engines at 0.2, but we have an omnibus standard that was just passed by the state of California, which is pushing that diesel standard for NOx even lower. Particulate matter is basically at 0. And that happens because of the particulate traps that we all kind of can think of. It's like really fancy mufflers, that increases fuel efficiency because you need the fuel to burn off the ash to regenerate so that the device will still work properly. It requires a lot of maintenance, and you have to be on top of it to make sure your engine is running. These engines today are not the engines of old, the dirty, black, smoke wasn't smoking, it wasn't working correctly back in the day. Right? If it wasn't burning oil like it was named tomorrow, then something was wrong. Now, if you're belching out black smoke, you have a serious problem with your engine. So we've made tremendous advances in diesel engine technology, and the state of California is the only state in the nation that has in-use standards for heavy-duty diesel engines. The only state. So we compete with all those other states who don't have necessarily a climate agenda or localized exposure agenda, like Nevada, like Arizona, like and Nevada is changing a little bit as it's getting Californified, right, by folks moving out of the state of California. But we are competing with things that don't necessarily have the same type of cost structure that we do in California. And so when we think about this movement towards the green economy, we need to make green basically to go green, as it's been said. So we need incentives. And with the IRA, one cool thing about it is that, you can still get tax credits for internal combustion engines as long as they're hybridized and they utilize some level of, I think it's 100 some odd kilowatt battery power. Or you can get up to 40 grand on a zero emissions non-combustion engine. So there's tax credits that are available. In California, you have incentives for you're turning the truck over, you can take your old diesel truck and turn it in, and they can give you, there's one program that will give you up to $400,000 towards the purchase of a zero emissions vehicle. And we need that because despite the promises from Tesla of the $150,000 zero emission Class 8 truck that has never materialized, the major OEMs who have been building heavy duty trucks for decades, their price point is around $500,000. When you talk about a hydrogen fueled vehicle, that's pushing $1 million for one vehicle. When you think about the range of battery electric, 250 miles on a good day downhill both ways, as we like to say. It will evolve, but we need to have those batteries get lighter because we are suffering an overall loss for total payload because you have the curved weights, for instance, of the Nikola Tre, which has about a 700 kilowatt battery pack. That truck on the curve weighs 29,000 pounds. A normal diesel day cab weighs about 16,000 pounds. So you're talking about a 13,000 pound payload differential, which basically at the end of the day, I'm social public policy guys, I'm not very good at math, but you have basically the need for two trucks to do the job of one truck. And now we have this other issue with tire wear, with brake wear, with all the torque in electric vehicles, you see more tire wear, which is what killed the 710 widening project was brake dust, tire wear. So we have all these things coming at us, and at the end of the day, again, I volunteer to put myself in the crosshairs of some of these panels sometimes because I really feel it's important for us to talk about the economics behind it. Because if we come out in opposition to zero emission rules, we are labeled as environmental racists. That's a hard coat to wear because it's not true. Again, we live and work in these same communities. I live spitting distance away from the 710. I have mild form of asthma, and when it gets really hot like this, it acts up. And whether or not that was caused by exposure to being around trucks for the past 20 years, quite possible. At the end of the day, we know that something needs to be done. But we want to get there in a way that makes economic sense, that doesn't put companies out of business, which is exactly what this is going to do. And when we talk about, from my perspective, this hypocrisy that the state of California is pushing forth right now, because it's all about zero emissions. The grid's pretty dirty. And until we can get more microgrids online, especially, everyone's lambasting looks at nuclear power as a way to try and create microgrids with clean energy, or using biomass or methane digesters. This all takes time, energy, and money. Solar takes up a large area of land. Wind takes up a large area of land. It's not like California's short on land. We have a lot of undeveloped areas for sure. But transmission, 30% loss or something in transmission, I'm not sure. But where we see this hypocrisy is that today, right now, there is technology that can utilize renewable biomethane natural gas that removes methane, a short-lived climate pollutant, from the atmosphere, and run heavy-duty diesel vehicles on that fuel. And the state of California does not give us that option from a regulatory compliance standpoint, starting as early as 2024.
We have no infrastructure. Hopefully the IRA will help build this out, but it takes time. And we need to do something now, because every time I hear from climate scientists, we need to do something now, today, not 8 years from now, not 10 years from now. And the state of California is literally truncating our ability to do that in my industry by just going straight to zero emissions. And, you know, baby out with the bathwater, damn the torpedoes, whatever you want to use as an analogy here. It's very disconcerting for my members because they say, well, these trucks are $500,000. Where do I charge it? The truck is the easiest. Electric vehicles have been around for a long time, right? But where do I charge my vehicle? I'm only getting 250 miles of range. I lost 12,000 pounds of weight. I've got members who have purchased trucks. They've taken delivery of them, and they're yard armed right now, sitting in their yards because Edison can't build out the infrastructure fast enough with new switching stations, with new transformers to get those trucks moving. So they're just sitting there collecting dust. So that was a little long-winded answer on, you know, where we fit into this, but it can be very frustrating for us in the state.
All about long.
Well, any panel that opens up with an F-bomb right during the keynote is my kind of. I love it.
That's my shipyard boy. You know, a lot of people don't know, but right out of high school, I didn't go to college. I wound up working at Todd Shipyards. You're old enough to remember Todd Shipyards. You know, and yeah, at San Pedro, and I worked right underneath the same Vincent Thomas Bridge. You know, pulling cable in Perry class fast moving frigates like the USS Vincennes that shot down the Reagan jet. But you know, that was a high hazard work area. You know, not just because you might get rolled over by a tractor, but constant emission and ozone from the welders and so forth. So, you know, I think a lot of us have, I mean, I'm sitting here drinking cold water because this heat is just killing my allergies. So, you know, but I think everybody here has some effect of the economics associated with diesel moving and trading goods. You know, I guess, how long do we have for this panel?
Got another 15 minutes.
Okay, so can we take questions?
Yeah.
Or do you want to go? Okay. So,
My name's Lauren Brown. I'm an attendee, not presenter, so I'm your audience. And I just want to ask you to recap for me real quickly. So I think you said two things. Biofuels would change your picture, so legalizing biofuels. And the second is you need charging stations for electronic trucks. Is that what you just said?
That would be, I think, a good synopsis, but it's not necessarily legalizing biofuels. You can use them. The problem is the ability to use them from a regulatory compliance standpoint.
Say it a little differently. Regulatory compliance wise, you get fined.
Yeah,
You
you can't even register your vehicle in California.
You can't register it. So
If you violate what's called in-use rules, so diesel truck has to meet a certain standard of control on the engine that's run. And all the diesel engine standards have all been pushed out of the state. So you have a level of control that you need to achieve with the diesel internal combustion engine, or you can utilize the natural gas component, either the fossil natural gas or the renewable natural gas. You can use biodiesel, which has NOx impacts, the higher blood you go. But my reason understanding, you can make biodiesel from renewable diesel from human waste.
excellent.
Right, but the problem is that the way the ARP, that's the California Resources Board, that table, they'll tell you everything's fine, that you can't take an internal combustion engine, even if it's 100% renewable fuel power, and put that into service after 2024 into drayage service, as we call drayage, that is movement of containers to and from maritime ports or intermodal areas.
Okay, that's all I needed to know. Thank you so much for explaining that.
I mean, but that's a good point, because what it does is that question highlights one of the dilemmas that we have, and that is, you know, we have single focus agencies that now need to be blended and be concerned about one another and what their regulatory authority is and how it is. You have a burgeoning leader in the stationary source world with micro regional grids next to a huge mobile source issue that is unable to get addressed. And part of his future is what is brought from the microgrid community on fully integrated solar EV infrastructure charging capacity, or EV fuel cell hydrogen capacity. And the physics of battery technology for heavy duty just don't work right now. You know, I'm an EV user, but I would never expect to have an EV heavy duty truck, you know. But I could see what Hyzon is doing and Volvo is doing, even at $1 million a unit. You know, when we pushed in 1993, you know, I was president of the Coalition for Clean Air at the time. I led the movement to remove diesel from the procurement policy of the LA County MTA. That was heresy. You know, you didn't talk, the guy who was the head of the machinist union was George Parkowski. And it's like, no way over my dead body are we going to get rid of diesel, because that's the best fuel, it's the cleanest fuel, we know how to operate. And I made him a convert, and he became a disciple of alternative fuels, hybrid and natural gas vehicles. That gave rise to a company called Clean Energy. We all know Clean Energy. But it was Warren Mitchell of the gas company and T.B. Vickers who came back and said, Tom, we have a solution, we can do this. And we got the Department of Energy to underwrite the difference between a diesel and natural gas bus, and got Cummins to manufacture these units, and it worked. You know, and that's the difference between an activist or an appointee, an elected official, and a leader. The guy that I used at the time was a very obscure MTA appointee named Antonio Villaraigosa. No one knew who he was, no one cared, but he was a board member, and that's what we needed as a Trojan horse to ride in that council in the valley, and at night we came on and infected everybody. And 8 months later, we had a unanimous vote of the board to remove diesel from this procurement policy forever, and diesel technology. A year later, 185 cities followed suit. 25 years later, you're hard pressed to find a diesel bus. That was probably the single biggest improvement in community health ever, because just MTA alone was the equivalent of the second largest refinery. But what about Montebello, Santa Monica, and Foothill Transit? All of them did the same thing. You know, to that effect, it goes to infrastructure. So, you know, in turn, when you look at the regulatory aspect of this, how do you answer the question, what is needed to build a more fully integrated network or ecosystem for you to support one another? You probably have in your vision of going beyond where you're at and looking at, like in the Inland Empire with warehouses. And you know, there's this huge movement to decarbonize warehouses because they're so intensely contributing to poor air quality in that area, and whether there's an opportunity for you to integrate with movement of trade and goods and is doing from a regional microgrid point of view on a fully integrated infrastructure.
So that's a good question. The first comment I want to make, what the map is making, is transitions are hard, very hard. Energy transition is very, very, very hard. I like the optimism we all have. I'm in that business, and when I heard that in 2035 we're going to stop gasoline cars from selling, I go, that is a disaster. The reason for that is the transition's hard and it takes time. In California, just getting a microgrid deployed takes 4 years through permitting process and getting it done. So if you project it out, it will be many years before, even if you had all the money in the world, we couldn't get all of them built in time. So when things are hard, you cannot be a purist. You have to be practical about how things are going. And I fully understand what you're saying. You gotta have a practical approach to how you're going to do the transition. You may have a goal of zero energy, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, but how are you going to achieve that? So a blend of all of that, the way I see it is, currently no technology exists on the renewable energy that will supply you power for days and nights, in and out. It just does not exist today. You cannot have batteries that are the size of this building to give you 10 days of power for this building. You just cannot have that. So what it means is that you gotta have other types of power sources that combine with the renewable energy to make sure that we build a resilient system. In terms of transportation, one of the things that we're doing is we're also spending a lot of time and effort to figure out how these microgrids will charge electric truck fleets. Electric trucks take enormous amount of energy, enormous amount of energy. So I think once we have a more practical approach, and you start thinking of combining all the technologies that exist today, and perhaps have a transition in mind, that this will be today, but over time, as the technology gets better and renewable energy will replace them, is the most practical way to get to all the issues that Matt is talking about, that everyone is talking about. And the grid stability. I mean, do you really believe that we're going to want to live in a grid where power is out 6, 7, 8 hours a day? I've lived through this. It's horrible.
Well, I think that there's always a practical view of looking at things, and then the more, we just got to do it. And I'm the son of 2 elected officials, as Laura pointed out, and my mom always had to say the same. It's like, shoot for the moon, come back with a piece of cheese, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you do. You put a stake in the sand, and you set an aspirational goal. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to meet that particular goal, but between those 2 points, where you start and where you finish, there will be innovation that will take care of it. Nobody at this table, I don't think I would have ever expected to see so much power in one little device called Ringo, and how it affected our economy so tremendously that it created an entire new industrial revolution that we're living in the midst of. The same will be true here. When the Italians knew that there would be a train in the future that could get over the Alps, they didn't wait for the train to be invented. They built the tracks and waited until innovation brought that. And then when it arrived, it worked, but the infrastructure was already there. And that, to me, is the way that we have to be thinking, especially in this era of abundance. My 13-year-old has so much more capacity for access to knowledge and learning. His 13-year-old mind is logarithmically further ahead by 10 times on an emotional level, maybe not on an academic level, but an emotional and IQ level that I was at his age. I was playing with 6 and 7 blocks, and he is coding, right? So that's the type of innovation that we have to rely on. It's not, a lot of it may not happen for people in this room, but the era of abundance that we live in prohibits us from failure. You had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. In the interest of time, maybe you can both give us a bullet point answer. And that is, Matt, with all the challenges that you have you been able to present a roadmap, an alternative to what's in front of you to make it easy for the transition to happen on the time that works? And then on the microgrid side, solutions. So what would it take, maybe like a list, 3 things, not explaining them in detail, but what would it take to reduce the timing from 4 years, because we don't have time, to a year?
As far as a roadmap is concerned, how we tried to have conversations with the regulators who are appointed officials. California is a very progressive state, and because for many years, environmental justice on a state level was not addressed. It was more local, South Coast AQMD, nonprofit NGOs. And where we've gone now is just basically to the utmost extreme. And what would be more practical is if we had infrastructure that was built out. 4 years for a microgrid, in my previous role for a commercial dealership group, it took us 2 years to put in 150 kilowatt charger. Permitting, siting, everything that goes along with construction, materials availability, cost fluctuations, all of these things made it difficult to deploy this technology, something that we were proactively doing on a piece of property that we owned. Where we think there might be a better approach is to let the grid mature, let the infrastructure mature, start with the lighter medium vehicles, the ones that we see in our neighborhoods every single day. I won't name any names. It was ludicrous to me that the post office wasn't coming to zero emission vehicles. I get the rural issue, but in localized urban settings, it's the perfect platform for electric vehicles. You have predictable routes and you can charge in the off-peak hours. That's where we should be putting energy, no pun intended, into right now, is to look at those deployments that make economic and environmental sense. It's tough for us to reconcile. I understand the localized health impacts. It's difficult to compare the two when you talk about climate and localized impacts, because climate, yes, they're connected, but we're still years away from a clean grid. We're still years away from mining lithium in the grid. We're importing all of that. There's an environmental cost to that as well. But I think that is a more pragmatic approach, and then incentivize people to use those renewable fuels, to not cut them off at the knees from using those and deploying those after just a drop dead date because they picked it relative to this useful life provision. I think that would be a better approach. I would love to see the train tracks built up over the Alps, because it would give my members a better feeling about deploying this technology. But it's a tough retail charging depots. It's a tough economic road to hoe right now because the technology is evolving on the charging side. You don't want to end up with stranded assets, but we need the charging infrastructure. So, whether the Ports Valley and Long Beach are going to build it out, they don't have a ton of room. You're super concentrated in Southern California. Land is an extreme premium. Less than 1% vacancy rates for warehouses in Southern California, LA County especially. So it's built, right? But we have to do something. We have to try to convince people to deploy this infrastructure technology so it can mature, and look at the places where it's a lighter lift to use that lower voltage charging overnight, trickle charge, which is also less expensive, and in those communities that need it most. That would be a much more pragmatic way to go about this instead of just a drop dead date for my industry.
Matt, on the for like closed loop lighter duty trucks, I've been in Detroit quite a bit lately, and at Roush they have a thing called Clean Tech, which is the liquid propane, and there's whole fleets of trucks coming in. Do you see that technology being kind of a bridge between where we want to be when we're all electric and
Auto gas, right? We can't use it. That's the thing. After 2024, we are precluded from putting any type of internal combustion engine, whether it runs on auto gas or Panther P or whatever. You cannot deploy it. That's where the issue is that it's all or nothing. Now you can get incentives today to go and deploy natural gas equipment, but my members are like, but why am I going to invest in it here when it's not going to get me what I need to get over the regulatory hump in order to stay in business? And so what do? They buy more diesel. That's exactly what is happening.
Yeah, so, I actually agree with some of the things Mark mentioned. You gotta have a practical approach. I'm actually quite optimistic, having said that this will all take time. Because I believe technology will continue to improve. They are improving at a very rapid rate. We will see battery technologies get better, significantly better over the next 10 years from where we are today. Today they're costing around $150. We can get to a $10, $15 rate in about 10 years, significantly denser. That would solve a lot of the problems we're talking about. But in the meantime, how do you get to that point? On the microgrid side, there are really three things that make it very, very difficult to get these things deployed. First, finding the best, most practical sites. That means the sites that have the load, or likely will have loads. They have the ability to have a footprint of solar or some other renewable energy technology. So that's the first, is identifying those sites. There are probably a million of those sites in California. We haven't even touched where we're going. Where does these data exist? These data actually exist
They already have it. We have access to the data, we can chart them out and figure out where the root is staying. So that's number one. Second, the permitting process is a mess. We have one where we're doing a microgrid for a college campus that has been stuck with a permitting process for a whole year because DSA would not allow to have a container full of batteries installed anywhere in the college or community. Why? Because we think it's a building that can house people, and therefore it's a different regulation. 1 year up, we have to document. Now we have to convert them to smaller units, it costs me twice as much, and I won't get it through for another year. There are literally hundreds of community colleges that have a climate action plan that depend on these things to get there, and they're not going to get there because DSA won't approve them. So this is an example of a permitting problem. We have doing 8 microgrids for City of San Diego. We know everyone, we talk to everyone. We have been stuck in the permitting department for 4 months and these people don't know what they're going to get. So if you take that long, in the meantime, cost goes up, labor cost goes up, everything goes up. So the economics that you had before get screwed up by the time you get there. Unless we shorten these things, we're not going to get there. So data, making sure the permitting process is better, and then permitting process should be as simple as getting solar at your house 2 days. They're all standard stuff. There's some extra thing, but other than that, it's really standard stuff. So that would really help. And then lastly, making sure the utilities allow you to do the interconnection. They take forever to get. Whatever regulation they have, they can say, don't export it, don't do that. We can all deal with all of those things. But you need consistent policies to get it through.
Yeah.
You know what I call utilities? The land where there is no time.
That's what monopoly is.
Little kids.
I'm sorry, the other question.
I have a comment and a question because I want to maybe challenge a little bit of the conversation that you guys are having because the reality is with climate crisis, we don't have time. We don't have time. And I'm hearing a lot of challenges, but we need more action. For a long time, we have an industry that had it very good, that had all the incentives, all the support, all the political muscle behind them, and that needs to change. Not because I want it only to change, but because it's a matter of livelihood. It's a matter of being able to deal with the different hit that we have in California, with seawater rise, with the fact that the Arctic is holding on a string, literally, the ice up there. And unless we take it very seriously, we're not going to get far. So your children and the children that I might not have or might have are not going to be able to live in a livable space here. So I want to make sure that everybody has this very clear. This is not about what is an economic standpoint. This is about how we're all going to work together to get it through. Because the communities that are most affected by climate change and by pollution are the ones that are already bearing the effects of climate change. Communities like in Southeast Asia, communities like in South America, that are burdening what we do here in the United States. So please don't take it lightly. Take it very seriously and do more than you can. So when you find yourself with like, well, I'm hitting this wall and I'm hitting that wall, well, go and knock another wall or make your own wall. Because this is the kind of attitude that we need to fight the existential crisis that we have now. So I just wanted to reframe this conversation because it's so easy. I was a commissioner for the largest public utility in the country. I have been working on environmental justice issues since I was a child. I just turned 44 years old and I'm still with these brands and I'm tired. And I want us to be tired too, so that maybe that way we can take real action and real steps forward. And it's gonna take all of us because to change everything, it takes everyone.
If I can make a comment, I'm not disagreeing with you, I actually agree with you. But the point I was trying to make was that that's the action we need. It's all very well to say that we want to do that, but if you don't make the changes, the policy changes, we're not going to get there. So how do we get to the policy? So if you were a commissioner before, please work on the policy changes that we're talking about. Get the permitting department to fix things. Get the utilities to get the data. Get his things done in the meantime, because they're also contributing to a better climate. So we've got to work on those things in order to get to where we want to get there. Otherwise, we'll still be talking and we won't get there.
I just feel like there's a large portion of the communities that want what you guys want to bring. And like you said, those people that are putting up the red tape need to be removed. We have to get there. And if there's anybody that's in the road, we have to either go around them or push them to the side, because if we don't reach these objectives that we all in this room for, it's a waste of time. I want to see the changes. I don't want my kids to suffer. I suffer from COPD. I don't want none of them to have to go through that. When I caught COVID, it was like something through a straw. For my last breath, laying there. No young nurse. I had an 83-year-old nurse. She forgot to bring me water every 2 hours. And I'm laying in the bed. I told her I'm sucking through a straw for oxygen. All I want is just some ice cubes in my mouth. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot." We need to get these roadblocks out of our way so our future could be great. Lauren?
Yeah, does anybody know how to fast track a permitting process? Like, what is this about? And the utilities, like if you're gonna negotiate with the utility companies, you have offices, you like lay money on that? I just never saw that.
Okay, permitting, I can tell you about permitting.
Yes.
So, permitting is all local jurisdiction. Every jurisdiction is different. Even within a jurisdiction, depending on who's doing the review, is different. We have 2 same designs approved and disapproved within the same jurisdiction. So it's really, I'm not even sure how you solve this problem. Like the ESA thing I'm talking about, it's in the books. How do you change it? I don't even know what the mechanism to change it. When people who are doing the review, they're not wrong. It's just written that way. How do you change that? Right. So I think that's the real issue.
We have had great examples in our country's history where we address that moral demand. And, you know, it wasn't easy to have the courage, for example, to shut down our banking system for 5 days at the start of the Depression. And the same man, it wasn't easy for him to have all the executives across the country convene at the White House while he's in a wheelchair, saying, "Through executive order, I'm going to condemn all of your manufacturing supply chain, and you're going to build tanks, you're going to build planes, you're going to build bullets." You just did it. And we have great elected officials, but we need more leadership. And I think this goes back to my moonshot thesis, where we have to build a common level of priority that is intense, that is focused, that is urgent in order to break the psychology, the state that our government operates in, that they are at the bitter end of in order to achieve the avoidance of that 1.5 degrees that ours is referenced. And that is the idea of a moonshot. Imagine what it was when John Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon, and it became clear that it was going to take 5% of GNP to get us there, the equivalent of $300 billion in today's money. That is astounding. And the number of jobs that came with it, and economic opportunity that occurred, and all the technology flooded the gates, we're still benefiting from. What they're doing is no less courageous. They have left their stable, certain futures for an unstable, uncertain future. But guess what? It's only as certain as your mind tells you it is. That you're on the side of history, and people in this room, we are all on the side of history. I know, I've been there. I've been doing this. Are you that you've been doing it a long time? I mean, I just turned 59, and I look back at Jules and remove fossil fuels and coal, for example, from our energy blend, but it will take time. But the entrepreneurship of this whole opportunity is, what's in entrepreneurship to me is not about making money. It's about innovation. One of the greatest entrepreneurs of the 20th century, Mother Teresa, right? She converted her compassion to energy and took care of entire communities of people. That's what they're doing. You know, it may not be in alignment with everything that we're thinking, it may not be in the same timeline, but we're all moving in the same direction. And that is what needs to occur within these large bureaucracies that simply, you know, Olympic is right, they just stall things. And by the way, don't think that that anti-ESG, anti-DEI stuff is embedded in some of these fabrics. They don't like. So, you know, there's something to say about, you know, the collective interest of a small group of people being able to make good things happen. As Martin Luther King used to say, indeed, that's the only thing that makes things happen.
I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you very much. It was great time. And we're going to take a break. Please come and take a look at some of the exhibits